Welcome everybody to the webinar being put on by Solaris Cancer Care today. So the Medicinal Cannabis panel. We have a number of people who are going to be speaking today, and there's going to be an opportunity to ask questions. So my name is Francis Lynch. I'm the Chief Executive at Solaris Cancer Care, and it's my pleasure to have you all here today and to give everyone the opportunity to learn more about medicinal cannabis from the very learned people who have given their time tonight to be able to speak to us and to have some of your questions answered later in the session. Look, I would like to start by acknowledging that Solaris Cancer Care works in Western Australia. We work on a number of Aboriginal lands. Where I am is in the Wajak Budja lands of the Noongar people, so based here in Perth. And the Noongar Nation covers most of what Solaris does across Western Australia, but we're now also working in the Pilbara, so there's a range of other Aboriginal lands. So we pay our respects to the elders, past and present, and acknowledge the burden that cancer has in the Aboriginal community and the importance for organisations to be working with Aboriginal medical services and Aboriginal communities to respond to the burden of cancer in the Aboriginal community. But today we've got some speakers, and as each speaker comes on, I will briefly introduce them, and they'll get a few minutes to talk about their interest and about their expertise. That will go through until for about an hour, and we also get an opportunity to listen to a person with lived experience in this area as well, which is really important. At about 7, we'll have the opportunity for questions and the panel to answer those. So let me get going. So we've got our first speaker. Was due to be Dr. Brian Walker. I don't think he's actually in the room just yet.
Yes, I am.
Oh, you are? Okay, sorry. I was looking around and I couldn't see your name. So, look, thank you for that. I'll just briefly introduce Dr. Walker. So, Brian was born in Malaysia to Scottish parents. His father settled in the Far East rather than return to Scotland after flying as a fighter pilot in Burma in World War II. And he followed his example for adventurous living. At the age of 13, he knew he wanted to be a doctor. But by 15, he was bottom of his class in school in Australia because he spent most of his time on the beach as a surf lifesaver. Taken to Scotland at 16 rather than volunteer for Vietnam, he succeeded in entering medical school and on qualifying to settle in Germany. The home of homeopathy taught me that modern medicine lacks in fairly basic concepts such as caring about the cause of disease, and he grew into more heretical ideas for wellness rather than naming a disease and prescribing a tablet. The Soviet Union beckoned as there were no specialists in general practice, but he lasted 1 year before retiring, defeated to the UK, where he once again escaped, this time to Hong Kong. 12 years later, Brian's wife suggested it was time to settle down, and they came to Perth in WA. While Brian is a specialist GP, he thought about a career in cardiology, but his passion is for wellness. He lives in Fremantle with his wife and 2 sons, and is the proud father of 3 other offspring, and still dreams of sailing off into the sunset with a traditional hulled sailing boat. Brian, what can you tell us about our topic tonight?
Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm not sure what I can tell you about the topic because it's really at the very beginning of where we want to be. And that beginning is really an exploration into managing cancer. Now, my background, look, my little brother, he passed away 2 years ago of a cancer, and I was deeply distressed to see him pass away, leaving abysmal care. Had I treated my patients like that, I would have been desperately unhappy with myself. I would have called myself a failure. And yet, this was actually the classical treatment, waiting 3 weeks to see a doctor, not being followed up, no one caring for him. He was at the other end of the world, but this, I think, is an example, when nothing can be done, you're left there all alone. And I very often get people coming to me at the end of that journey saying, "Now, fix me. Now, fix me." And I've been saying years before, do you know, there's a better way of actually managing cancer, but they're frightened into this approach of only the orthodox medicine. They will cure me. It's going to fix me. So very often I'm saying, look, okay, if that's the way you want to go, let me know when you're ready. And it's distressing to see that so many people deny the access that they should have to good medical care, which isn't just only the orthodox or only the unorthodox, the alternative, but spreading out into much more of the options that are available. So if anyone knows, I used to be the doctor for Anita Moorjani, whose miraculous recovery from untreatable terminal cancer and indeed multi-organ system failure, she just woke up again after she had died. And if you want to follow her very interesting approach, her book is called Dying to Be Me. And at that point, that's when I took my knowledge of alternative medicine from the theory into very much the practice. Who are we? What are we doing? And cannabis is one of the things which I love, I cherish, because there is such a lot of interesting things to do with cannabis. Now, not many people might know that we actually have in our system endocannabinoid receptors. That's right, we were built to receive cannabis. In fact, we can make our own cannabinoid substances, which it's a remarkable thing. We're designed to actually eat or to consume cannabis. There are two types of receptor, CB1 and CB2. I'll not bore you with the pharmacology of it, but when it comes to using cannabis, it has an intense relationship with our central nervous system. Now, you might think, well, that's interesting, but we have a branch of medicine called psychoneuroimmunology. And that is fascinating because it goes from the idea that a thought up here can actually physically change your brain, which then physically changes your immune system. Now, I'll say that again. A thought can actually change your immune response. Now, we know this. In indigenous culture, if you commit a serious crime, a sin, and have your sung to as a death sentence, that person will die. I've seen the opposite happen when people who should have died, their thoughts, their mind is so concentrated that they actually live. And this is remarkable because it is the difference between life and death at times. And I've seen this many times. And the cannabinoids that we have can play a role in how we can link in to that psychoneuroimmunology. I find that fascinating. So what actually, before we get on to cancer, what can cannabis do for you? Well, there's a wide range of things we can do with cannabis. Apart from pain, which is probably the commonest thing we can do. I see that every day. What about epilepsy? You've seen the stories of people who were consigned to multiple epileptic seizures, and all of a sudden with CBD oil, they're free or relatively free of epilepsy. We can do the same thing with Parkinson's disease. There's research into autism and a wide range of illnesses for which we're only now getting a handle. Nausea, insomnia, anxiety. Now, cannabis used in cancer, there's two main approaches. One is the standard one. I have got cancer, I feel unwell. Can cannabis relieve my symptoms? Yes, it can. The anxiety associated with a serious disease, the worrying, of course, helps no one. So perhaps I can relieve some of those symptoms, the pain which might be associated. That's certainly the treatment of symptoms of cancer with cannabis, that's well documented and very well approved for. Now, we need, of course, to get government approval to use this Class A dangerous drug. I put it to you that cannabis is nowhere near dangerous. I said on television recently that cannabis is about as dangerous as a cup of coffee. And this is absolutely true. There are other effects, of course. It's not the same as coffee. There are some very major effects. But the danger point of view, it does not kill people. You walk into IGA and buy Panadol, that can kill you. Cannabis never kills you. It needs to be used properly, however. It's a sacred herb, it's a healthful, healing herb, and needs to be used properly. So, in the sense of using cannabis in cancer, can we use that, for example, in palliative care? Absolutely, we can. It's invaluable for that. If you're taking things like opiates and opioids with nasty side effects, we're needing drugs to combat the effects of the opioids. Cannabis doesn't have that. Does it on its own manage the symptoms? For a while, yes, but not always. So if you are having symptoms which need to be managed, better managed, I would suggest have a discussion with your doctor. Can cannabis be helpful for me? And in most cases, I think it can be used safely and efficiently. There is another aspect to using cannabis. Can cannabis be used to fix my cancer? Now, here we have actually a major question. And this is where the medical minds really get freaked out, because I have, in my experience, seen that cannabis can actually slow or indeed prevent cancer. There are a number of things which are off the beaten track. Low-dose naltrexone, dandelion root, Jim Gordon herbs, many things which can certainly influence cancer, the progress of cancer, quite dramatically. But cancer itself, treating it with cannabis, can anything be done? I would refer you to that wonderful book by Rick Simpson called Nature's Answer for Cancer. Now, Rick Simpson, I do recommend you get that book and read that. It's available on Amazon. Or my webpage will teach you about Rick Simpson herbs, Rick Simpson cannabis. In my experience, it's not the panacea. There are some cancers for which I think it's going to work less well. But in general, is there any reason not to use cannabis in cancer? And I can find no sensible reason not to. However, the kind of cannabis that I can prescribe legally as a doctor is way too weak, I think, in my experience, to manage the disease, cancer. And this is where I really want to speak to you, take a different view. Can cancer be managed with something stronger than the government allows? Now, I have to tell you, all of this is illegal. The government doesn't recognize it. Accessing cannabis in this form is absolutely forbidden. On the other hand, does the government really care if I live or die? And that's where I say, if the government doesn't care if I live or die, and my life is in my hands, I will do what I need to. I will do whatever it takes to make the most of my life. I think that's a human right, a basic fundamental human right, to seek, to strive, to live, and to live well. Because existing with symptoms, existing where you wish you weren't alive, that in my book is really not sufficient. So can cancer be used to, can cannabis be used to treat cancer? And I would say it can. Now, how does it work? Well, there we have actually a question. How does it work? And a lot of research is now going into that. Have I seen that happen with my own eyes? Yes, I have. Should you do it? I don't know. But it's certainly something I think would be very useful to consider. You'll find actually one case in this program today where that has been used with some success. And I can say I would be very happy to consider speaking with anyone who would like to try this. Now, cannabinoid oil is something that anyone can generally get from a cannabinoid plant. Hemp has lots of cannabinoids. THC is simply one of the cannabinoids. We can mix our definitions. People say, I've got a really bad cold, it must be the flu. It's not flu at all, influenza, it's simply a bad cold. We can make the same mistake with cannabis in that THC is a product of what people do call marijuana. I resent that name. It's a xenophobic, racist name. It's part of the cannabis plant. Low THC can be defined as hemp. And hemp can, of course, transform into more THC, as we have seen. But the definition is it's all one plant with a wide variety of strains and a wide variety of expression. So, do the constituents of the cannabinoid plant have any benefit for us medically? Well, CBD and THC are the two ones that we know best of all. And they are different. They work in similar ways, but they are very different. The CBD is one which probably very soon will be available over the counter as a healthful healing herb for pain, for anxiety, for insomnia. THC is the one which sends you high. And I do caution that if you're going to do the heavier dose of cannabis using Rick Simpson oil, that is heavy in THC. Now you might wonder, will it make me addicted? The answer is no. Will it space me out? Well, if you take enough of it, yes. This is what sends you high. Will the Rick Simpson oil that you could prepare yourself send me high? Yes, if you take the full dose. But this is why you need to know how to use it. So I would be wondering, how much do you need to know to make a decision about how you want to use cannabis, if you want to use cannabis at all? And for that, I would counsel that you seek someone who knows about this with experience and discuss what your options are. So there's a lot of issues to discuss. You'll be discussing that this evening, I'm sure, with some excellent speakers. From my point of view, as a medical practitioner, experienced in managing cancer professionally, alternatively, as well as someone who is very much in favor of using cannabis as a healthful substance, I would simply say, someone like myself, there are plenty of us around, I believe, find someone like that, have a long, careful discussion and a think, get informed, and find out how you could use cannabis to your benefit. And I do look forward to seeing your questions and answering them as far as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. There are going to be some questions, and I can see a couple of people have already started to use the Q&A box down the bottom. So I'm very happy that we are starting to get some questions. If you don't know how to do that, just go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen. You'll see a Q&A. There's a little 2 against it at the moment because we have 2 questions. There will be an opportunity later. So we won't get into the questions right now, but we'll get into those later. So we are going to now move to Paul Mavor. And Paul is a registered Australian and UK pharmacist. His company Health House was granted the first medicinal cannabis import license in Australia, and he is currently distributing medicinal cannabis products to eligible patients. Over the last 30 years, he has owned several retail pharmacies and worked both in Australia and the UK. In the last 3 years, he's focused on researching medicinal cannabis and has been to conferences where growing and manufacturing facilities and spoken to patients and prescribers in the US, Canada, Israel, and South America. Welcome, Paul, and yes,
Thank
over to
you
you.
for that kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen and show you some pretty pictures. Hopefully you can all see that. So I'm a pharmacist. I specialize in all drugs, but lately I've been, for the last 5 years, I've been devoting my work and my expertise to medicinal cannabis. But I want to stress from the outset, there is a great medication that can help patients. Cannabis is essentially another tool in the box, a really good one in my opinion, that has its uses, its side effects like any drug. I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of cannabis as a medicine. So two things from the outset. There's been a massive increase in the amount of patients that can access medical cannabis. And it started from 2017, where my company Health House imported the first ever lot of medical cannabis into Australia. At the moment, at that time, there was very few patients. And fast forward to 2021, we've just hit 100,000 medical cannabis patients in Australia. Now, access, it still needs a bit of work, but it's gone from specialists only needing a 2-month approval by the state government to be a 1-page online form that any GP in Australia can fill in. So it has changed, and it will change quite a bit. I'll talk about CBD going over the counter later on. That's not as straightforward as it seems. The other key point is the average cannabis user does not look like this. They're not using cannabis medically to get high. They're using it, they generally look like this. The average cannabis patient is using it for chronic pain. They're generally elderly. They've got sore knees and sore backs. There's not too many above the age of 50 who don't. And it isn't getting rid of the pain altogether in a lot of cases. It is improving their quality of life, and it's taking pain from something that's quite excruciating and very, very difficult to live with to something that's manageable. And as I said, it gives patients quality of life, helps them sleep better, and means their pain score is a lot less than it otherwise is without taking it. And it's used quite often with a range of other medication. Now, one thing that quite surprised me, cannabis was widely sold in pharmacies in Australia circa 1930 for some of the same things we're starting to rediscover the use of now. Things like chronic pain, end-of-life cancer pain, and drug-resistant epilepsy. And at that time, it was responsible for about 30% of all prescriptions in Australia. So one thing that attracted my interest to looking at cannabis as a medicine for patient was when I saw this meme on one of the world's biggest scientific journals, Facebook, and it showed some extraordinary data, in my opinion. And these figures are based around about 2012 in America. And there's horrific toll from cancer sticks and sitting on couches and my favorite beer. But one thing that attracted my attention, prescription drugs, mainly pharmaceutical opioids that are commonly prescribed for chronic pain patients and cancer patients, are responsible for this horrendous toll. And that figure has climbed from 2012 to almost 50,000 people having fatal overdoses each year in the US. And the figure's around about 800 people die from pharmaceutical opioids each year in Australia. And what really attracted my attention was cannabis, or marijuana on this slide. I prefer the medical term cannabis, responsible for 0 deaths. And I thought, how can such a dangerous, highly addictive drug be responsible for no deaths? And it's very difficult to overdose, as I explained shortly. But that doesn't mean all cannabis use is safe all the time. There is problems with sometimes purchasing underground cannabis or not getting from reputable sources, or taking too much and operating a vehicle, heavy machinery. But in terms of toxicology, and Dr. Brian Walker earlier on stated that it was about as harmful as coffee. I think it's potentially safer as a medicine used medically under the supervision of experienced doctors like Dr. Walker and others who have got experience in this area. But this chart, while it looks a bit confusing, it shows how difficult, well, how easy it can be to have a fatal overdose on some drugs. And every drug listed here, starting in heroin, is on a ratio of 1 to 6. 1 being an effective dose. The figure on the right is how many of those doses it will take to cause an overdose. Heroin is 1 to 6. Alcohol is on a ratio of 1 to 10. So meaning 4 glasses of wine or beer on a Saturday night might get you drunk. It would take 40 glasses to kill you. Codeine is on a ratio of 1 to 20. Tobacco 1 to 21. And any coffee drinkers on the webinar will be pleased to know that 1 cup of coffee will get them buzzing on a Tuesday morning. 50 cups it will take you to cause a fatal overdose. Now, cannabis is right down the bottom on a ratio of 1 to greater than 20,000. So one joint might get you high. You would have to smoke more than 20,000 joints, i.e. a whole ton of cannabis, in order to overdose. Now, cannabis used medically, you only need a small amount or microdose, and most patients get help rather than high. They get small amounts to relieve their pain. They do not get high of the psychotropic effects in most cases. One other thing that really surprised me is cannabis is low on the addiction scale. Now, once again, heroin and its cousin methadone leads the way, but you've got perfectly legal prescription drugs, benzos and barbiturates leading the way. And then there's over-the-counter medicines like smoking and alcohol that are essentially twice as addictive as cannabis, which is over on the right on the scale here. Now, coffee isn't on this scale, but if it was, it'd be 0.9 on this scale, meaning essentially coffee is more addictive than cannabis. And this chart hasn't got two of my favorite addictions, reality TV and dark chocolate. People are addicted to some strange stuff, but what we found in practice is used medically. Once again, you're only using small amount. Those patients having to cease cannabis because it doesn't agree with them or doesn't work are not addicted in any way, shape or form and can generally go cold turkey. I'm talking the majority of patients. So different people handle drugs differently. So everyone is slightly different, but in the scheme of things, cannabis is low on the scale. Now, I want to talk about price of cannabis. Now, initially prices were high. People were paying $500 or $600 per patient per month. But right now, the average patient in Australia spends around about 200 Australian dollars or less per month. And these are patients that have tried everything else and nothing has worked for. So it is really, in some cases, a last line of resort for chronic pain. And the good news is there are some subsidies available. Some of the private health funds, such as HIF, are subsidising cannabis as a medicine to the tune of $80 per patient per month. Unfortunately, HBF aren't at the moment. We've been having a conversation with them because we see it potentially keeping chronically ill patients out of the hospital system, which costs them thousands of dollars per patient per day. We've also seen patients accessing it through workers' comp, motor vehicle, and war veterans being able to access it through their gold card. Prices are coming down, and over-the-counter cannabis, CBD in particular, will mean prices are dropping even more so. And there's almost 200 different brands on the market. It is competitive out there. There is some really good deals available through your doctor for new patients accessing it. So cannabis and driving is quite an interesting one because most cannabis formulas are a mixture of CBD, which is 100% safe to drive. And if you're on a CBD only formula, no problem, you can drive. But most patients accessing it for chronic pain will need some form of THC. Now, it is first and foremost not okay to drive whilst you're impaired at the slightest. But by and large, patients taking it medically are only taking trace amounts of THC and they're not impaired at all. And they're being asked to sign paperwork saying they won't drive a motor vehicle because at high doses, particularly when you say smoke cannabis or take massive amounts of THC, you may have psychotropic effects or be impaired and not okay to drive a motor vehicle. I'm not saying you should at all, but for the lower levels, it might be equivalent to, say, having a lemon, lime and bitters and still being okay to hop behind the wheel. It has got a small amount of alcohol in, but you're not impaired. Now, every state of Australia has got different drug driving laws, and they're looking at the moment about changing this, and there's a big movement out there called Drive Change, which is looking at the legislation and looking at adopting best practice, which they're starting to use now in both New Zealand and Canada, where police or roadside tests are looking at the impairment of the driver, maybe asking them to do a sobriety test where you walk along a straight line or touch your finger on your nose. And if they suspect impairment, then they might be asked to do a blood test, which will definitively show whether they've got a large amount of THC in the system. But watch this space. These laws are developing. Now, I joke with a lot of people, this is a picture of my basement at home. No, it's not. It's a cannabis grow facility. When you're growing a medicine that you're giving to chronically ill patients, and it needs to be the same from batch to batch. You've got to grow it under the same conditions from crop to crop. So they control every aspect of the life cycle of the plant, and that includes sunlight, airflow, nutrients, water. And they've got these carefully manicured plants grown indoors, also for security, and they can turn 3 or 4 crops per year. I've toured a lot of these facilities, including some the size of 10 football fields end on end with robotic arms. They're very cool to see, and they're starting to grow a lot of cannabis now in Australia. Now, we imported the first lot of cannabis, as I said, but thankfully now about 2/3 of the cannabis we sell is now grown here in Australia, which is really good to see. And Australia is hoping to be a net exporter of cannabis to other countries. So when they extract the cannabis, they extract the oil from the flower, not the leaf. And they use equipment like this. It's CO2 extraction equipment. They might use a ethanol cleanup, and they end up with this yummy yellow stuff you see on the left. It's a mixture of gunk. It's everything in there. They might separate the chlorophylls, the waxes, end up with the good stuff on the right-hand side, and they formulate that into unit dosage forms. Now, many grow facilities have more people working in their quality control section than they have their cultivation section. And that's to make sure the medicine they produce for patients is safe. At the end of the day, it's got to be the same from batch to batch, same strength from batch to batch. It's got to be clear from pesticides and heavy metals, and they might dilute it in a carrier oil such as olive oil or coconut oil. They might also put it in a capsule. So there's a lot of unit dosage forms out there. The most popular at the moment are capsules, oils. We're seeing a lot more capsules hit the market. And there's a number of patients, particularly those with really bad chronic pain, who might prefer to vaporize their cannabis from a flower, the special vaporizer machines. And that's quite appropriate where patients need a quick hit with pain, and they need immediate relief and stronger THC formulas. We're not far away from having topicals in Australia, so patients will be able to rub it on. Dr. Walker talked about the endocannabinoid system. There's cannabinoids found, the receptors found throughout the entire body and every major organ. So it'd be nice to have some topicals to use externally for chronic pain. So CBD is going over the counter now. In February this year, the Australian federal government, the health department, or the TGA, they looked at all the evidence, found CBD to be very safe and well tolerated, and it's widely sold over the counter in other countries such as the UK, where I'm also a registered pharmacist, the US, and most of Europe. Now, they passed the legislation, however, there's no registered products. Now, there's a bunch coming, watch this space, but they're probably about 12 to 18 months away. They know they're safe. They need to put forward data for the government regulators to look at it, and they also need to do a few low-level studies. But the cannabis CBD only products will be available over the counter from pharmacies. You'll just be able to buy them without a prescription. There are a few caveats on that. Not available for children, and they've got to be in unit dosage forms, not more than 150 milligrams per patient per day, or a 30-day supply. And they can't contain any THC in there, so they've got to be CBD pure only formula. So just in wrapping up, I see cannabis as a pharmaceutical disruptor. There's a gradual downscheduling of cannabis. Codeine appears to be going the other way. It's recently, a couple of years ago, been made prescription only, and there's a lot more scrutiny happening on pharmaceutical opioids, which are really good for acute pain when you first get an injury, but for chronic long-term pain, they're largely ineffective. Cannabis, as you've seen by some of the data, is relatively safe, and there's some studies that show that it's quite effective above other medications currently available. Now, it is going to be more and more readily available. In other countries, you can just buy it without a prescription. There's none of these cannabis vending machines on the street of Perth yet, but one day in the future, who knows? I look forward to answering any of your questions later on, but if you have anything you'd like to ask me personally, please look me up on social media or email me directly. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Paul. That's very great. Great to hear. And look, I'm sure there will be some more questions. I can see people are using the Q&A. So keep doing that. I am going to now introduce Professor Marco Falasca, who's going to talk about some of his research around pancreatic cancer. Marco is an internationally recognised researcher of over 30 years' experience, having earned his stripes in renowned institutions such as New York University, University College London, Queen Mary University of London. He's now at the Curtin Health Innovation Research Institute, and he continues to add to a long list of significant contributions that he's made to the research community, which includes pioneering discoveries in metabolic diseases such as diabetes and cancer. He's specialising in cell metabolism. Mark and his team of cancer researchers are keen to find out all there is to know about the mechanisms involved in the development and progression of pancreatic diseases, including pancreatic cancer. He's made a number of discoveries in this area, particularly around the use of medicinal cannabis. He's worked on discovering a potential new treatment for aggressive pancreatic cancer called pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, PDAC, which may have the potential to increase the survival of patients, including those resistant to currently available chemotherapeutic drugs. So, Marco, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your introduction, and good evening to everyone. Hope you can see my screen. So we are interested in investigating the pharmaceutical potential of cannabinoids and cannabinoids-like molecules in cancer, but also we are now extending our research to other conditions. But tonight I would just briefly describe our research on pancreatic cancer. So pancreatic cancer is a very aggressive disease. The survival rate is unfortunately very low, and the available chemotherapy is extended the survival only a bit, but unfortunately it comes with side effects and recurrence. So you heard so far talking about the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is basically formed by two main receptors, cannabinoid receptor 1, cannabinoid receptor 2, that are activated by in the body, are activated by endocannabinoids. And they, in a way, mimic the action of phytocannabinoids that comes from the cannabis. I'm interested in not only the cannabinoid system, but also in the so-called endocannabinoidome. It's an extended family of receptor and endocannabinoids-like molecules that are quite interesting, and they regulate many physiological functions such as metabolic function, and also involved in cancer. So in particular, we are interested in this cannabinoid receptor called GPR55 that is inhibited by cannabidiol. So to sum up what we found, the most striking finding we found, we use different model of pancreatic cancer, but in particular, this is a mouse model that spontaneously developed pancreatic cancer. So this is the survival of mice that are untreated, that are unfortunately very similar to what happened in humans. So the pancreatic cancers developed by these mice are very similar to the pancreatic cancer developed in humans. So if we treat these mice with cannabidiol alone, we have improvement. It's not massive, but there is an improvement. Similarly with gemcitabine, that is the chemotherapy used in the gold standard in the clinic for pancreatic cancer patients. So what we found remarkable is that when we combine cannabidiol with gemcitabine, we have a substantial increase in the survival of these mice. So, and basically we want to reproduce these in humans, so by doing proper trials. So to move to trials, we had to address, in the last few years, we had to address several questions. So in where we extended our studies to other cannabinoids, natural, synthetic, combination. Another key question is, what is the dosage? So we know the dosage that is working in mice, but what is the dosage we need to use in human? And the other thing is, what is the, how can we measure the benefit of cannabidiol or other cannabinoids? And what about toxicity? And are cannabinoids interfering with chemotherapy? And what is the endpoint we should use to when we treat in the trial the cannabinoids with chemotherapy? Is it survival? Is quality of life? So we proposed at trials, is now under evaluation. So we're looking, of course, you need funds to do these trials, and to finally validate the ability of cannabidiol to, we start with cannabidiol. So because we know it's been proven, so by our studies, to treat patients together with chemotherapy. And so the hypothesis is that we want to reproduce the effect seen in mice in human, and that cannabidiol can improve the activity of chemotherapy and with a good toxicity profile. So, and we decide to use as a primary endpoint the survival of these patients. So hopefully we hope to have an increase in survival of these patients. And of course, secondary endpoint would be the quality of life, pain, nausea, and tertiary endpoints. We want to evaluate new predictive biomarkers, so biomarkers that will tell us if the cannabidiol is working, is effective. So, and this is the design of the trial that we're trying to start as soon as possible, where we want to use all the patients would be treated with the chemotherapy, gemcitabine plus nab-paclitaxel in this case. So half of the patient will be with the chemotherapy alone, the other half will be chemotherapy plus cannabidiol. So, and this is, then we have two two arms, the experimental arms with cannabidiol, the control without cannabidiol. So, and of course, these are the inclusion criteria that we will use to select a patient for these studies, and the exclusion criteria for the trials. And this is the analysis plan. As you can see, it takes time, but we hope to start soon and have finally a response and see if, I think it's a good proof of concept. It's a starting point. So to validate the effect of cannabidiol in pancreatic cancer, then these can, you know, pave the roads to other cannabinoids, other cancer treatment. So I think it's pivotal to start. And most importantly, have scientific validation. So one of the issues is we need to face a route administration. So you can have a different bioavailability of depending on the route of administration of use. Of course, in cancer, you want to have a long, prolonged concentration of cannabinoid in circulation that is a bit different to what you expect from other acute treatments. And also we are looking at biomarkers. So this is just to sum up the research we're doing in the last few years. So trying to find markers that tells us if cannabidiol is indeed working. So to conclude, so what we found is in mouse model, we found that cannabidiol can prolong the survival of mice that spontaneously develop pancreatic cancer when used in combination with gemcitabine, and we hope to repeat and reproduce this result in humans. So just want to acknowledge the research team. So it's quite diverse. We have gastroenterologists, we have oncologists, and pharmacists. So I think it's surgeons. So it's very diverse and multidisciplinary team. And to conclude, this is my team. and past current. So it's and I need to acknowledge the funding I got from AVNER, Pancreatic Cancer Foundation, the Pancreatic Cancer Research Fund in UK, and also Medicinal Cannabis Australia. This is helping me with the plan to start our trial. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marco. It's amazing to know that research is happening here in Perth, and so it sounds very promising. To hear more about some research, we're going to hear now from Cheryl Mavor. So Cheryl Mavor is representing Medicinal Cannabis Research Australia. Sorry, Sharlene. Sorry, not Cheryl. Sharlene is a medical scientist and co-founder, director of Medical Cannabis Research Australia, who has been researching how medical cannabis may treat an ever-increasing array of disorders. Her university background is in diagnostic pathology and gives her the knowledge to understand disease processes in the human body. She's travelled to the US, Canada, Israel, Colombia, and Chile to learn firsthand from leading researchers and clinicians in this new field of cannabinoid science. She's passionate about sharing this knowledge by educating medical professionals and patients under the banner of her charity, the Medical Cannabis Research Australia. She's committed to advocating for the use and access to medical cannabis for patients in Australia, as well as promoting and contributing to more research to give clinicians the evidence they require to pursue this treatment for their patients, both in Australia and in the rest of the world. Sorry about that, Sharlene, but over to you.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for that introduction. So as Francis mentioned, my name is Sharlene Mavor. I'm a medical scientist and I am Managing Director of Medical Cannabis Research Australia. Just going to have a chat to you this evening about cancer and palliative care clinical trials in Australia using medicinal cannabis. So I just wanted to start to very briefly tell you about Medical Cannabis Research Australia. So we're a charity that was formed back in November 2016 when we realised that we needed a platform for which to educate about medicinal cannabis to not only health professionals but patients, other caregivers and legislators and other decision makers. So we've spent most of our time over the last 6 years concentrating on education, and we've done that mainly by running seminars and now webinars. And I'm quite proud to say that we have been able to educate thousands of people around Australia, and not only Australia but the world now with the use of webinars. So yeah, like I said, 80% of our time is spent on this, and we also do spend a lot of time advocating for easier patient access to medicinal cannabis by writing letters and working with the government to facilitate this. And we're also very, very focused on research sharing and facilitating, and we spend a lot of time reading about research and making sure we get that information out to our followers. So I wanted to start off with talking about the 2020 Medicinal Cannabis Clinical Trials Grant opportunity. So this was facilitated through the National Health and Medical Research Council on behalf of the Australian Government Department of Health. And what this was trying to facilitate was to support new clinical trials that examine the effects of medicinal cannabis for the management of pain, symptoms and side effects of cancer and cancer treatment in cancer patients. So the anticipated outcome of this opportunity is to build evidence base to help medical professionals make more informed decisions about prescribing medicinal cannabis, and to focus on managing pain, treating pain, symptoms and side effects of cancer and cancer treatment. So this opportunity did close late last year. So we're hoping to see a plethora of new clinical trials around medicinal cannabis for cancer being announced in the coming months and years. So a really wonderful initiative. Now, we've already heard from Professor Falasca, so I don't need to talk about his work. But what I would like to talk about is our global pancreatic cancer initiative, which is an initiative that has been formed by Medical Cannabis Research Australia to fundraise and raise awareness about pancreatic cancer to patients and patient advocacy groups. And what our main aim here is to fundraise, and we'll be doing that by running a webinar on Wednesday, the 19th of May. So we would like to help Marco to continue his preclinical work and also see this facilitated into patient trials. So we do have social media handles here that you can follow. And if you are able to engage in our webinar, we would love it if you were able to donate and share with everyone that you know. So we will be running a US-based webinar as well, partnering with a US organisation called the Cannabis for Cancer Declaration. And they will be running that webinar there and really getting a global presence about this. So we'll be having speakers who will include oncologists. Obviously, Professor Falasca will describe his work, and also pancreatic cancer patient advocates will be speaking. So the first trial I wanted to talk about in a bit more detail was a trial being run in New South Wales by a commercial drug discovery group called MedLab Clinical. So this trial is being headed by Professor Stephen Clark. They started off with a pilot study that saw really great results, pain reduction by 40% in metastatic cancer patients. And the drug they were using appeared safe and tolerable. And so off the back of that, they've gone into a larger observational study where they'll be investigating the safety, tolerability, and further efficacy of this pharmaceutical grade cannabis product, mainly concentrating on cancer, pain, and also non-cancer pain. So it does encompass all types of pain. So this particular product is a THC and CBD buccal spray, which uses nanotechnology to enhance drug delivery and efficacy. And it actually bypasses the GI tract, which means it's quite bioavailable. All states and territories can participate in this trial, and any prescribing doctor of the product can enlist his patient. The medicine will be subsidised, and participants will be followed monthly for a maximum of 12 months. So they're now recruiting. They're hoping for 2,000 patients and plan to finish by 2024. Okay, next there is a cancer, sorry, that's the same study. There's some, there were some details there for anyone that would like to find out about that previous study. So moving on to cancer, chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting study, which is being run by Associate Professor Peter Grimison in New South Wales. So this is evaluating an oral THC CBD cannabis extract. Now, this particular study started off as a pilot, and they have published results now, just quite recently, and they found a significant improvement in the control of chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, and a quarter of the patients taking the product experienced no vomiting and nausea, compared to 14% of those who took placebo. So they used an oral capsule. It contained 2.5 milligrams of CBD and 2.5 milligrams of THC. And the patients were able to receive the study drug or the placebo for 3 consecutive chemo cycles. And obviously it was proven to be safe and effective. So now they've gone on to a definitive trial whereby patients will receive the study drug or placebo, once again 3 chemo cycles for 6 to 9 weeks. So there were a few side effects found, but most of these were considered manageable. So this particular trial enlisted 170 patients, this trial upcoming is 170 patients across 7 hospitals in New South Wales, and this is ongoing until October 2021, and patients are offered free product after the trial. I've got a short video to play, just describing some of the results of this initial pilot study.
The early results are in. Medicinal cannabis can make a difference to cancer patients who suffer the grueling effects of chemotherapy. The landmark trial is halfway through recruiting patients across the country.
Harry Freeman is one of the 80 patients to receive these cannabis capsules at Chris O'Brien Lifehouse.
Anything that they offer that can make you feel better.
The 32-year-old was treated for testicular cancer, the second most common cancer among young men.
It's pretty upsetting because I was getting married in the February.
Having potent intravenous chemotherapy wasn't pleasant.
I was pretty spaced out and not well.
There is still 1 in 3 people who have vomiting and half of people who still have significant nausea despite our best anti-nausea medications.
Lifehouse has been testing the use of cannabis in a scientific study to assess its true effectiveness in providing relief.
And this was a placebo-controlled trial, so nobody knew who was getting what until the end.
Early results reveal they make a difference.
An extra 1 in 10 people had control of nausea and vomiting, so it improved from 14% to 25%.
Harry could tell he was taking the trial capsules during his last round of chemo.
That was definitely the best cycle out of the 3.
The capsules did cause some patients to become drowsy, dizzy, or disorientated. However,
more than 4 in 5 people said they preferred having cannabis despite some side effects.
The trial is continuing. Up to 250 patients at cancer centres across New South Wales are being recruited. Harry got married a week after his treatment and is now expecting a child.
Very lucky.
Gabriella Rogers, 9 News.
The early results
Sorry about that.
are in. Medicinal cannabis can make a difference to
Sorry about that, everyone. I'm just trying to move this video along.
cancer patients who suffer the
There we go. Okay, moving on to another trial in New South Wales. This is being run under the banner of the Centre for Medicinal Cannabis Research and Innovation through the government there. It's a palliative care trial and it's led by Associate Professor Mira Agar. So this particular trial was undertaken to see if medicinal cannabis can improve the quality of life for patients with advanced cancer by improving the appetite and appetite-related symptoms. So their outcomes were to look at the safety, efficacy, dosage, frequency, side effects, and best delivery mode for palliative care patients. They did start out as a stage 1, where they were looking at vaporised cannabis flower in advanced cancer. So with this particular one, they were looking at a THC dominant flower and they were dosing 3 times a day for 7 days in 30 patients. They took daily blood samples to measure the concentration of the drug and they also did daily food records and questionnaires to monitor appetite, mood and other factors. So that one did conclude and they got quite positive results. And as a result, they did start on a stage 2 double-blinded RCT, a randomised controlled trial, which looked at oral THC pure tablets with a matched placebo for anorexia in people with advanced cancer. So once again, they also titrated doses for 7 days upwards with these patients, and they stayed on their highest tolerated dose for 3 more weeks. This involved 250 patients. This, in fact, is ongoing, so they're still recruiting. So if you are in New South Wales, you may be eligible to participate in that one. The details are on screen. The next trial, also in New South Wales, is the Australian, under the Australian Centre for Cannabinoid Clinical and Research Excellence, or ACRA. So this is under Professor Jennifer Martin, and this is a cannabinoids for symptom control in advanced cancer and is an open label trial, which means it is quite a number of products are able to be used, and it's openly reported. So around 600 patients are enlisted in that trial, and it is ongoing as patients stay enrolled until they withdraw, up to 12 months and beyond. The data collected for this particular trial, they're looking at efficacy in pain, appetite, nausea, general quality of life, as well as looking at dosage and safety and side effects of these medications. So they are encouraging oral THC or one-to-one THC to CBD oils to be used, and it's at the discretion of the doctor which product in accordance with symptoms. So this did start a couple of years ago, and that's ongoing until April 2023. So if you're in New South Wales, you might be eligible to participate in this one. The list of participating hospitals are on screen, as well as details to contact the researchers for that particular trial. Now, over to Queensland. There's been quite a lot of research going on at the Mavor Cancer Care Centre and National Health and Medical Research Council. So they've done a symptom control, symptom relief and palliative care study in advanced cancer with lead researcher Professor Janet Hardy. This particular trial was facilitated by a $1.3 million grant from the Medical Research Futures Fund. Once again, they also started out with a pilot study with 21 patients and investigating safety, dosing and efficacy of cannabinoid medications for symptom relief in advanced cancer patients undergoing palliative care. So they had 14 days of titrating up to symptom control and 14 days at that stable dose. There was 2 arms. One arm was with CBD only and the other arm was with THC only. So they were measuring pain, nausea, shortness of breath, anxiety, and depression. So that has concluded, but that data is still being analysed. Subsequently, they have already started 2 more trials under the same banner, MedCan1 and MedCan2. Now, they are identical trials, except they're using 2 different medications. MedCan1 is using a 1-to-1 THC to CBD formulation. And this is a double-blind, placebo-controlled randomised trial looking at 72 patients on active and 72 patients on placebo. And once again, also titrating for 14 days up to symptom control and then 14 days at that stable dose. So looking at pain, tiredness, nausea, shortness of breath, drowsiness, appetite, anxiety, depression, and well-being. And this is being run until May 2022. Now, the MedCan1 is the same trial, but with CBD only. So if you are in Queensland and you are able to access this trial, quite possibly, there are details on screen for the right people to contact. Now, this is a very recent trial that's just been announced out of Victoria, and it's at the Elysian Newton-John Cancer Wellness and Research Centre. The lead researcher is Dr. Aaron Wong, and he's running a double-blind randomised controlled trial, so high-level trial, assessing the effects of medicinal cannabis on quality of life and symptom control in advanced cancer. So this is partially funded by the Victorian government, looking at safety, tolerability and dose range, impact on global quality of life, and they'll be measuring pain, insomnia, nausea, anxiety and treatment relief or satisfaction. 116 patients will be recruited on this trial, and it's recruiting up until September of this year. So if you are in Victoria, there are some details on screen of who to contact to see if you might be eligible. So that is me. These are my social media handles. If you would like to follow me and follow my work and all the research that I'm sharing, very, very open to having you contact me to talk about any of those trials that we've discussed. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharlene. Obviously a lot going on around different parts of Australia. Now, there is one more person to present, this Sandy King. Sandy has a lived experience as a person diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and can give us her views and understanding of our discussion topics today. So, Sandy, over to you.
Thank you for having invited me this evening. And Sharlene, I think you are going to lead the way on this. I'm actually going to be talking about my husband tonight. I'm fortunate not to be the cancer patient, and we're actually still going through all this at the moment.
Absolutely, Sandy. So I'm here. So I've just got a few questions to lead you through so that you're not feeling on your own. I can kind of hold your virtual hand here. Sandy, tell me about your husband's diagnosis. When did it happen, and how did that all come about?
Yeah, so my husband was first diagnosed in early August last year, and so the symptoms before that was just sort of like an onset, like he'd lost quite a bit of weight in a short amount of time. So we suspected something, but certainly not what we got. So the diagnosis was advanced pancreatic cancer, and we were told at the time it was borderline resectable, and that was because it was walled around the main vessel, which is in that part of the body. My husband was then to go on a 3-month course of chemotherapy, and we were also sort of informed that there's a 30% chance that the chemotherapy will shrink the tumour, so that there's a chance of doing surgery on my husband. Unfortunately, in November, we weren't part of when we had the scan after the 3 months of the chemotherapy, which was, I believe, quite a strong chemotherapy used for that type of cancer. He wasn't. The scan showed that the good thing is that the cancer hadn't spread, but it hadn't done anything in the way of shrinking the cancer. It actually probably was looking a little bit larger at that point. So. And so then, of course, we were then on the path of, with our oncologist, we're on the path of the best case that we can work on is stabilising the cancer and, containing it to not spreading throughout the body any further and to keeping it the size it was. So from after November, my husband then moved into a combination of chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and this was all with the outcome of stabilising. That's what we're being guided to expect the best of. Yeah, and so do you want me to continue through that, or have you got another little question that you'd like to ask?
Well, I think you covered it, but I'll just double check. What was the prognosis that you were given at that time, Sandy?
So the prognosis at the first point of diagnosis is that we were aiming for shrinking and surgery. However, after the first rounds, which was a 3-month chemotherapy, I was told the prognosis was to work towards a management chemo. And when I asked what the management chemo looked like, this can be months or it can be years, depends on how we can manage the cancer with chemotherapy, and I would take that as for the rest of his life what that looked like. Sure. So I think we've covered what kind of treatments were offered at that time. So you came across medicinal cannabis. Tell me about that. Yes, so it was around that diagnosis, and we are still working in the conventional medical system as well. So my husband is currently going through more chemotherapy, which is I guess that's trying to stabilise the cancer. So it was around the results of the scan in November that it was interesting, because I saw the Olivia Newton-John slide there, and it was just something which, when my husband was diagnosed, I can remember reading about Olivia Newton-John a couple of years ago, and I just at the time remember thinking she's actually come out and gone global with that. So there's got to be merit in what she's doing, because the medicinal cannabis is clearly doing something for her, and I assume it's still doing something for her. So it was around that time of knowing that surgery was not an option, which you can imagine just hits you to the deck, both of us. So my husband and I decided to take control of his health, and we feel that we only had one shot at this, and that was a very, very short time to make some decisions. So we really wanted to research using cannabis in the medicinal way to help with all that. And so we're really fortunate to have found an integrated GP to help us with that, and that's on the prescription, but we've also sourced a stronger cannabis as well. And having absolutely no knowledge around cannabis, even marijuana, if you want to use that in the other sense, was really important to not only have that support, but to be guided and to be responsible in that space of knowing what to do, because there would be no one more uneducated in that space than the person talking to you now.
For sure. So it was around December that you started using medicinal cannabis, so it's very recent.
Yes.
Can you explain the effects on your husband's well-being since he started taking it?
Absolutely. So started, I think it was towards around about I'm just guessing around about the third week in December. So just a bit before Christmas, he started on that, and of course it's on the smaller doses, etc. So started on that, and so December and January weren't great months for my husband. He wasn't looking very well at all. He was not feeling very well. He was on pain relief, which naturally I think that type of cancer is that you would need pain relief. And so as we were heading into February, towards the end of January and early February, the need for the fast relief and the slow relief, pain relief, he actually came off all that, and he came off all that in a really quite a short amount of time through that. And so, and also before that, as was talked about much tonight, is the anxiety, but also my husband started with anxiety and then it ended up in depression, in my view. So he was on medication for that as well. So we're looking at by mid-February, he was off all that. He's taking his medicinal cannabis, and also, of course, we're also doing supplementary herbs and vitamins and things. But round about that mid to end of February, I saw this massive light go on in my husband, and just the energy and how he looked and how he felt. It was just quite a light that went on. And so people who look at my husband now, if you put the weight back on him that he's lost, you would not know that he is as sick as what he has been diagnosed with. It's quite mind-blowing to look at him and see how he now looks with what he has going on.
Absolutely. So obviously this has been a really positive effects for you with medicinal cannabis, and we've got a scan coming up, haven't we? So
we do.
I hope we get some good results back, and we can continue to see these really great results with medicinal cannabis for your husband.
Yes, definitely. And we're big believers in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Sandy. I think we're going to welcome you onto the panel in a minute or two. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It just gives people hope, and it shows people that there is efficacy with using medicinal cannabis for cancer symptoms, and this is what we're trying to let everybody know. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
This is where the technology starts to be challenged. I think all of our ability to manage this next part as a panel together. So I think all of the speakers can now bring themselves off, bring their video back on. And now in terms of looking at, I can see that Paul has been a busy beaver and has been answering lots of questions for the Q&A that's already been happening.
I'm happy to answer as many as possible. It's a fascinating and developing area of science, and there's lots of contradictions. It's not a clear answer. I like to use the term smoke and mirrors, but there's what we know, and there's a lot of great research like what Marco's doing. And the more we find out, the more we realize how little we know. But there's certainly some great work happening, and I know for certain cancer conditions, if I was in the same situation, I'd be experimenting and looking at some of the developing research.
So would you like me to read out some of these questions for our attendees? And we can have a bit of a discussion about that, because I don't think can the attendees see these answers? I'm not sure.
There's a great question that we need to answer from Hillary. I might read it out actually. Hillary asks that we define the difference between cannabinoid oil and THC. Cannabis is generally used generically without definition. So does THC have any medicinal value? I've read that it does not. Why not be more specific with definitions? CBD oil, THC, medicinal cannabis. So in a nutshell, the plant itself, the cannabis plant, is really complex. There's 144 known cannabinoids, and that'll be a couple whole lifetimes worth of research for people like Marco and some of the great research going on. But the two main ones we're seeing are THC and CBD. And the best way to describe it is salt and pepper. Then different medical conditions, you might need more of one and more of the other. Dr. Walker earlier on talked about the endocannabinoid system. Now, these two ingredients, THC and CBD, mimic natural chemicals within our body. And that's a really fascinating thing, because they're working, they seem to work and help certain disease states. They mimic the two main natural cannabinoids that our body produces, anandamide and 2AG, that are responsible for pain, the immune system and appetite, which explains a lot about what cannabis does. Why THC, for instance, gives you the munchies, and CBD is good for chronic pain. And there's a whole lot that we don't know, and it's a developing science. But in a nutshell, THC is good for appetite and really strong pain, and also spasticity that some patients experience. CBD is good for lower level chronic pain and also seizures. They're the sort of main areas that it's good for, and anxiety. So, but combined, there's a theory that there's a synergistically effect, or they call it the entourage effect, where different cannabinoids working together are greater than the sum of their parts. That answers the questions and doesn't create as more questions.
I just wanted to answer someone's question about the side effects of CBD and THC in trials. And they question the fact that manageable maybe isn't informative. So I wanted to just expand on what some of these side effects were for people. So mostly they're described as mild or moderate drowsiness in 50% of patients. There's also such side effects as sedation, dizziness, drowsiness, some nausea. So I guess this is why we describe them as manageable, because it really, in the scheme of things, are quite mild. So I hope that answers that question. So have we got another one here?
Yeah, a good one. Chris P asked a really good question, that how do they find a doctor that specialises in medical cannabis? Well, any GP can prescribe medicinal cannabis. However, a Canadian doctor explained it really well. He said there will be 10% of doctors globally very anti-cannabis, won't prescribe it, won't touch it, will speak badly about it. But there'll also conversely be about 10% of doctors that are specialising in it and seeing lots of patients, like Dr. Brian Walker, and there'll be about 80% of doctors who don't care either way. They'll sit on the fence, and they'll refer most of their patients to the 10% who do specialise. So out there's a couple of lists. I think, Sharlene, you've got access to lists of GPs who are there's a matter of subspecialty in amongst all the other things they do. GPs are really good people to see with regards to medical cannabis because they're accessible, unlike specialists that take about 6 months to get in and see an appointment. And from my experience, a lot of medical cannabis patients are very complex. They're on a lot of medication. They need to see GP once a week or sometimes even more regularly.
Just having another look through the questions here. I'm not sure if you've got any knowledge around this, Paul, but do you know how do people use vaporizers?
Yeah, it's a special device. They put the actual flower in and inhale the cannabis. Now, it's designed mainly for severe pain when they've tried a bunch of other things. Now, smoking cannabis is at a lot higher temperature. The vaporizer burns the cannabis flower at a lot lower temperature, but it is inhaled. So it's not appropriate, say, for children or for the very elderly or someone who might have poor lung function. But it's a special type of device. There's a couple of brands available that patients can buy.
I would have to agree with one of our attendees who said, why don't we have more cancer trials in WA? I would absolutely love to say that we did have more as well, but I guess the government is spending a lot more money in other states on medicinal cannabis trials, and I think maybe that's something that we in WA need to address and maybe see if there's some more state funding for trials here in WA. Something to think about.
There's a question here, is CBD oil good for rheumatoid and osteoarthritis? Can it help with inflammation and pain? Probably the best answer here is you need to speak to your doctor because it's not what they call first-line treatment. There are a couple of other treatments that your doctor might try first, for instance, things like paracetamol, ibuprofen. They might try physiotherapy or indeed a pharmaceutical opioid. So it comes further down the list. But if you find none of those work, then it is certainly a treatment option, but it's one you perhaps should discuss with your doctor as part of your general health. And it may be that you take a combination of medicines and that's something that's assessed by your doctor at the time.
There's also been a question here regarding side effects of medicinal cannabis in those patients that may have heart conditions. Paul, you have answered this. Would you like to just explain that one a little further?
Cannabis is generally well tolerated with side effects. For some patients taking really big doses, it can increase the heart rate. That is pretty rare though. We're finding more often than not, it might be relevant that it does lower the blood pressure. I think because it makes patients more relaxed. We're seeing lots of patients that they're on a blood pressure medication and they're having to reduce that because they're getting lightheaded, which I suppose shows the medication is working. They're more relaxed, their blood pressure's coming down, and we typically reduce their blood pressure medication. It might be on a 20 milligram strength of blood pressure medication, then we might be able to reduce it down to, say, a 10 milligram strength.
I'm just having a look through the other questions here. Okay.
I think there's one from Mark.
Thank you to the person who's happy to help us with gaining some more research dollars from the WA government. That'll be wonderful. Paul, there was a question regarding driving. I know you did cover this in your presentation. Would you like to speak about that a little more?
It's a really complex issue, and there's 6 states of Australia and 6 different drug driving laws. But what we're finding is roadside drug testing is inaccurate. Now, the Cannabis itself. CBD is 100% safe to drive. So if you're on a CBD only formula, you can drive. But with anything THC, and because it's fat soluble, the roadside drug tests are designed to say, yes, there's THC in your system, or no, there's no THC. And given that THC can last and be detectable in trace amounts for up to 2 months later, and if someone, worst case scenario, smokes a joint, they might be only high for an hour, but if they take it medically, they might get trace amounts over a low period. They may not be impaired at all. And number one rule with any medication is don't drive impaired. But as I say, it's complex now. We need to make sure people don't drive impaired. But the best practice is, as I said earlier on, done in Canada and New Zealand with roadside sobriety testing, followed by a drug test if they suspect impairment. I think the question, I'm not sure if there's a typo here, but someone asked actually how Marco started on pancreatic cancer research as opposed to other cancers.
Oh yeah, it's a long story. Actually, we were investigating receptor, in particular GPFT5 and endocannabinoid-like molecules. So we didn't start with medicinal cannabis. And actually, the very first publication on this topic was in 2010, when we focused mostly not only pancreatic cancer, but also ovarian and prostate. And then we, of course, the potential of cannabidiol in particular was great because of the side effects, because of the tolerability. So, and therefore we focus on pancreatic cancer. It was also one of the main topic at the time, so of my research. So it was pretty easy to test on our model. So this is why, and more importantly, we get funded on pancreatic cancer. So it's this is why we focus on pancreatic cancer, but I think there is potential for other cancer type.
Absolutely.
And can I just add that Marco's research absolutely needs to be done. I'm so proud it's being done in West Australia, because some of these patients with pancreatic cancer, it's one of the worst ones to get. It's really, really bad. And there's very little in the way of treatment options. And to give you some idea, some of the chemotherapy agents they've been using have been used for the last 50 years, and patients aren't faring any better. Whereas some of the other cancers, the treatment over the last 50 years has improved greatly, and so much so that they're a lot more treatable, certain other cancers. But this is one of the bad ones. So yeah, they need this research done, and the preclinical study and a couple of anecdotal patient experiences has shown this definitely needs to be investigated.
And am I right in saying that this is a world first, using medicinal cannabis to treat pancreatic cancer, Marco?
Yeah, I don't think there is trials. There are no trials on cannabinoids or medicinal cannabis in the world. So it's a bit surprising. Probably one of the reasons is because, especially in our case, if you consider 2010, we already had some evidence, and then pancreatic cancer a few years later. And when I moved to UK, from UK to Australia in 2014, I was already discussing the trials in UK, 2014, and we're still here. Why? Because you need money to do it. So no one is paying for a natural compound. This is one of the, in the last few years, there's been a huge, boom of the cannabinoids and medicinal cannabis market. And this is helpful, but still, it's a bit difficult. It's a bit difficult. So especially for, us scientists, we want to see patients improve their health. So, beyond the commercial value. So, and I still think it's important. We have evidence with cannabidiol. I think it's a good starting point. I'm not saying I will stop to cannabidiol, but of course it's a good, quite a few years we have this evidence, and it's a bit frustrating, honestly, that we still didn't start.
It's a difficult one, isn't it?
First and foremost, we know it's safe. I've shown some of the safety data. Evidence is pointing towards that it might be a treatment in conjunction with chemotherapy. I think that's only a good thing.
Can I just want to say something? It's a bit, I recently, Paul very well, but I don't want to mention name, but, we proposed Paul was in the team, we proposed to agency, let's say, our trial. And, immediately before us, there was people talking about cisplatin, treatment with cisplatin in 2021. And, everybody knows how toxic cisplatin. So when we present our data, there were a lot of questions, cannabidiol toxicity, cannabis toxicity. It's frustrating. It's frustrating. So, we're talking about cancer and we are happy to use, cisplatin was started used in the 70s and it's still used. It's very toxic, severe side effects, still used, fine. But, no one questioned the toxicity of chemotherapy. When it comes to cannabidiol, people is concerned about toxicity of cannabinoids. So still there is resistance that we need to fight.
Absolutely. And we know the evidence is well and truly across the line for medicinal cannabis helping greatly relieve suffering for patients experiencing nausea in relation to chemotherapy. That there are other drugs that help vomiting, and yes, once again, it's not first line, but that low level metallic-like tongue that patients experience, there's nothing like the benefit of using medicinal cannabis. Some of our patients tell us, but they absolutely need to do this research. The mice models and the anecdotal cases point towards there being some benefit to some patients, and it's great that it's happening here in Western Australia.
Exactly.
Need to fund it now. So if anyone listening's got any government contacts or would like to give and make Marco's research, a reality. And that's not to say patients can't access this medicine now, but we really do need a robust clinical trial versus a placebo, so we can see once and for all how it's
absolutely, because I guess the end goal is to see this as a standard treatment that is offered to patients in hospitals and not just a fringe medicine. So I guess we do need to provide that evidence for doctors.
Can I ask a question of the rest of the panel, which is really about, Solaris Cancer Care? One of the things that we're really focused on is helping people live the best life they can after they've had a diagnosis of cancer. And, that's not just about reducing nausea or vomiting. It's also about improving people's ability to feel that they can get on and be part of their community and their family, and hopefully reduce levels of anxiety. Is there any research that's really picking up the impact of these in the work?
One thing you touched on there is quality of life, and absolutely, rather than being one drug which treats one medical condition, one of the real beauties about medicinal cannabis, in my opinion, is that it helps a range of medical conditions. Not only does it help the chronic pain, it's got a mild anti-anxiety, mild anti-inflammatories. It will help nausea. So people need to eat that are feeling sick, nauseous, and in a lot of pain. They need to replenish themselves. And I mentioned research, but there was a recent UWA study on cannabis for sleep. Every single patient on the study, not only did they prove it was safe, they woke up feeling better. They had a good night's sleep. They didn't wake up feeling groggy, drowsy. It certainly improved a lot of patients' quality of life. It didn't necessarily cure their underlying condition. It helped quality of life and helped sick patients become more mobile and cope with life better. But absolutely.
Exactly, and that has been the basis of a lot of the trials I spoke about, quality of life studies, looking at a range of different symptoms and just measuring different gauges of quality of life. So I think that's where most of the Australian trials have headed, to kind of encompass a range of symptoms, not just focusing on one. And we're already seeing really great results in that regard. as Paul pointed out. I mean, if it's working for people without cancer, of course it's going to be working for people with cancer. That just goes without saying.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering whether there's any more questions. So are we getting to the end, or is there any last questions there?
They keep coming online. There's lots of really good questions.
Good.
I'm just trying to pick up some other ones. Someone's asked a question about medicinal cannabis and brain cancer. Is there an ideal dose they should be aiming for? This is a really, really tough one because it's a developing sort of science, and there's been a number of clinical trials that have looked at this, but they haven't probably done a definitive trial in this area. They're still looking at things. And one thing I would say to patients that I don't think it's a choice between, you know, chemotherapy and cannabis. I see that patients do best actually embrace all types of clinical treatment, as well as other natural therapies and holistic treatments. But I personally think, as Marco's work, you know, points in the direction, there's a synergy between chemotherapy and medicinal cannabis. But the dose hasn't been established. There's a number of clinical trials, particularly on the East Coast. Sharlene knows a number of researchers ongoing looking at that space. But all the studies that I've seen so far show that patients have better quality of life.
Definitely. It's one of the trials I didn't mention because otherwise I would need another 5 or 2 minutes. But there was a glioblastoma trial that had been completed fairly recently. It was more of a proof of concept trial looking at symptoms, but they also did measures of the actual tumours themselves. Very early results show very positive results. And obviously for the symptoms, they did get good results, and they are going to be moving to a larger trial very soon. That was a trial run by a researcher called Dr. Janet Schloss from Queensland. So watch out for that. It was run using a lot of the patients out of Charlie Teo's clinic in, I think that was in New South Wales. So watch this space because that should be announced fairly soon.
Sorry, getting towards the end of the question. Someone asked about metastasized breast cancer in her pelvis. She's currently taking medicinal cannabis oil. Can she take her CBD oil in the daytime and then separate THC at night just for sleep? Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's like salt and pepper, that THC may cause drowsiness in some patients, but that's used effectively if patients do want a good night's sleep, because there's no hangover effect in the morning. If they take an oral formula, they're getting good benefits. So there's a lot of patients who may take a CBD only formula during the day where they need to be alert and, for instance, drive, and then they might take a THC formula at night. So you do get a good night's sleep and wake up with a healthy appetite. It's used quite commonly. But I just want to sort of, can I ask you a question, Sandy? Obviously, you're the patient here. We can sprout science who are blue in the face, but yes. Did you actually go to the doctor seeking medicinal cannabis, or it was you read about it on the internet? And
yeah, no, we went seeking medicinal cannabis. Definitely, that's what we went for. But and when I said that there was no one more uneducated than me, that was absolutely that. So it was like, to do what you got to do, you do. It was, I think it was just our one shot at that. So we were fortunate, as I said, to find a GP that supported that and guided us with how to do it and resources to explore and all that. So we're still learning, but we went specifically with that intention. And like you said earlier, all therapies, you know, the chemotherapy, the medicinal cannabis, and the vitamins and the herbs and all that. So we're doing all that at the moment. And there has to, well, fingers crossed, because we do get scan results this week, but there has to be something working to look at my husband now. And by all accounts, when he was first seen in December, the GP would have expected he was on a decline, should have been on a decline from that, but he's not showing the normal patterns of what someone with his type of cancer and how he was at that stage is showing. So he's actually, he's looking and feeling so much better. Yeah, so we went seeking it without knowing what we were doing. And that was the importance of, you've got to be working with someone who doesn't help guide you in the safe way, because we got to be safe, because we're still doing all the and he's still he's just started more chemotherapy as well. Well, not just started on the third cycle of that one, but that would be ongoing, I assume. Hopefully ongoing or something.
It's actually really good. He's looking at both treatment options. I've seen some patients do really well.
Yes, we're looking at everything.
And I'm a pharmacist. Whenever I get sick, I take everything.
Yep.
One of everything. And there's some great treatment options out there. And normally I don't take a lot, but when I get sick, I take everything.
One thing I'd love to mention is when you spoke about the sleep, my husband goes to bed and has the best night's sleep that he's ever had in his life. And he wakes up clear, sharp, refreshed. And to me, that quality of sleep has to support healing. And not that I know what I'm talking about, but it has to support healing when your body is rested and getting that type of sleep. It must help. It's got to help.
I don't have any problem sleeping. I know I do get cranky when I don't get I've seen a lot of patients in the pharmacy that suffer from insomnia, and they're not doing that well. Sleep is a really it's good for a clear mind and certainly quality of life. And pain patients who don't sleep,
his anxiety was taking his sleep away before that because he was on medication. So I said he was very high anxiety, and then it sort of went to that depressive. I guess what goes up's got to come down, and so his quality of sleep wasn't good because a lot of other things got thrown in the mix there. So his sleep was terrible. It's been really good pretty well since the onset, which is, I think, making a big difference just alone in that space.
And I think you mentioned that to me, Sandy, just the fact that he can get sleep and is less anxious is going to contribute quite significantly to his wellness and to his recovery.
I would have to think of a body that's being allowed to do that. It's like children, isn't it? When children are unwell, the great thing is they go to sleep and they seem to recover quicker than what we do as adults because we push through everything. Whereas that quality of sleep, and he was in the stage of sleeping. So he said December, January, not good at all, very lethargic, sleeping pretty well all day and all night, not good, not living. And then his day sleep's really reduced because he's getting this really great quality of sleep at night, and he works. He's up doing things. Always has a little. My husband's always had a little bit of a nap in the day, as what he's always done. So he has a little bit of that time in the day. But it's quite mind blowing just to see a change which happened quite quick after a period of time. There was sort of nothing, and then there was something. And the something has continued for the best part of 8 to 10 weeks now. It is surprising a lot of people when they see him.
Sandy, one of the questions was, what is your husband currently taking?
As in the oils?
And medicinal cannabis. So yeah.
He's taking He's taking a strong medicinal cannabis, which we had to source, and the dosages were guided by our GP, which is helping us with the dosage. And apart from that, nothing for pain, nothing for sleep, and he's on some herbs and like vitamins as a supplement. With an immunity type of booster. So when he does have his chemotherapy,
I'm actually a huge fan of zinc, truth be known. But
Dr. Walker alluded to the Jim Gorton protocol of herbs. It's quite a lot of herbs, and so yeah, so it's a lot of the things he sort of, some of the names sound a lot of, yeah, they're quite bizarre herbs I've never heard of. So he takes those herbs daily, quite a few times a day. He's on the Medicinal Cannabis. He is now on, I guess it's more like the maintenance type of chemotherapy. I think it's the same drug that Professor Marco, that you're Falasca. I'm sure that's the one he's just started. So this will be his third cycle coming up with that one. And so he's had us, and the last, a month ago was the first time that his cancer markers and the blood tests have come down, starting to come down. And so we'll have another cancer marker result in a week, but we'll also have a result from his scan this week as well. So yeah, so it's a lot riding on it, but look, you know what, if it hasn't gone anywhere and it stayed around the same, I think the oil still has a great option that can continue to work to improve things. So we're not going to sort of drop our bundle if there's been no great result in that space. If it hasn't spread, and even if it's contained its size or even perhaps shrunk a little bit, I still think that would be a great result. He's not in any pain, none.
That's good. Quality of life.
Fantastic. Yeah. I think we've pretty much come to the end of our questions, haven't we?
Yeah.
Okay, well, if we're at the end, I might do a bit of a close off and do some thank yous. So, look, I'd particularly like to thank all of the speakers tonight. It's been a really great session. And look, thanks particularly for your patience in terms of the changed circumstances. We were all supposed to be together in the hall at the Solaris Centre in Cottesloe tonight. Thanks particularly to Sharlene and Paul Mavor for helping set up the Zoom webinar today, because this was all done yesterday afternoon in fairly quick time when we got the isolation lockdown finished, and then still had some restrictions this week. So thanks for helping do all of that. Also to Kerry Ann Blondell for helping to organise the session earlier in the year, and to Daksha and Kerry from Solaris for helping with the organising and promoting of the session. Solaris Cancer Care is available to all people impacted by cancer in WA, all patients and their carers. We offer complimentary supports and support groups to everybody, regardless of what type of cancer diagnosis you have. If you haven't heard of us before, or you want to find out more, go to solariscancercare.org.au and you can find out more there. You can register for different events, and you can subscribe to our newsletter. This session has been recorded. We will put it up on our website in the next few days, along with any of the presentations that we have available to us. So look, I really want to thank everyone who has listened in tonight and participated. We've had over 30 questions and comments, so a lot of engagement. So thank you to everybody who's been part of tonight's presentation, and have a good rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for allowing us to participate. Really enjoyable.